Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. We are thrilled to be here with you today. Thank you for participating in our session. We are here to talk to you about changing the feedback experience. My name is Jen Ostrich, and I'm joined by my business partner, Pete Berridge, who you'll see in a moment. And we did want to let you know that we are going to be participating live when this is airing. So we'll be available on the chat to answer questions, as well as leaving some time at the end to answer any questions there as well. So we hope you'll stay on and join us. So to kick us off here, I wanted to ask you to imagine you were receiving this present today. At the end of our session, you're going to get a gift and get to open that. And what feeling goes through you as you imagine receiving a gift? And then what if I told you actually inside of this gift was feedback about you? Does that feeling change at all? You know, it's funny because we tell our clients that feedback is like a gift. However, sometimes it doesn't always feel that way as we imagine opening this present. So I want to actually bring you into a bit of a feedback state of mind and invite you to imagine what it felt like for you when you've received feedback. Maybe it's the last time you received feedback. Maybe it's been quite some time. But I invite you to even go ahead, close your eyes, and think of the first thing that comes to mind when you were in a place of receiving feedback. And even reflect on what feelings come up for you, what you were maybe feeling at that time. And we would invite you to even share some of those emotions that are coming up or some adjectives in the chat, sharing a bit about what it feels like to remember that time when you received feedback. And even maybe a time when you were tasked with giving feedback. What feelings come up as you reflect about that? And are they similar? Are they different? So feel free to be sharing among you in the chat what feelings are coming up as you consider this. You know, when we do this in front of a live audience, we have people popcorn out the words out loud. And oftentimes their words are descriptive of what this little image reflects. We hear a lot of words like anxiety and nervous, and even though there might be positive feedback, always waiting for sort of that other shoe to drop. And that's why we're here today, to talk about changing that feedback experience and trying to bring it a little bit closer to what it should feel like, that gift that we refer to it as. But I think the reason why these types of emotions come up for folks, what we found is almost everybody has at least one experience that almost brings about like a PTSD reaction. And that's simply because we believe that feedback in organizations today is broken. And not without good intention, but oftentimes the way these feedback processes are designed actually have quite a bit of design flaws. And beyond that, also the way that the feedback's being delivered has some flaws as well. So we want to walk you inside a little bit about what we mean by this. First of all, in a 2012 meta-analysis, it showed that nearly a third of 360s actually caused more discouragement instead of what they were intended to, leading to less effectiveness and overall people feeling worse as a result. And we liken this to what we've said here is some of these design flaws. So walking through each one here, first of all, oftentimes the intent of the feedback is compromised when it's gathered around somebody pending a promotion or even a raise. Coworkers and peers may know that and won't want to be the ones to share maybe the more honest or direct feedback, and so that compromises the intent. Almost always the feedback is confidential, which means you don't know who it's coming from, and as a result, it lacks that context, maybe even lacks specific examples, so you're left feeling a little bit confused. Oftentimes, feedback is more problem-focused than solution-focused, meaning there might be some things that are mentioned that are going well, but more times than not, there's more explanation on what the weaknesses or areas of improvement need to be. And finally, oftentimes feedback lacks that follow-through, that even if it's given and that person begins to make progress and change, rarely is it followed up on or talked about even after the initial time that it's delivered. As a result, this is leaving employees feeling isolated and alone, discouraged, and even wondering if their colleagues are with them or actually against them because they don't know where the feedback came from. So in addition to the design flaws, there's actually a few delivery flaws as well that are driving why feedback's broken today. First of all, feedback is just not given nearly as often as it should be. If you're an organization or a leader that's still focusing on feedback as just a once a year annual performance review, that's simply not good enough anymore. The trend today is real-time feedback, even encouraging each one-on-one between a leader and an employee to include some level of feedback. Further, the feedback often lacks a focus on strengths. And what's interesting about this is what we know from research, and this is from Tom Rath and the Strength Finders 2.0, is that when a manager focuses feedback to an employee around their strengths, the likelihood of that employee actively disengaging in their role is only 1%. That's 1 out of 100 who would be likely to disengage. However, that number jumps up to actually 22% when the feedback focuses on weaknesses or areas of improvement. But what's really astonishing, but potentially the biggest opportunity of all, is that nearly half, 40%, are likely to disengage when they feel ignored by their manager. So the worst possible thing you can be doing is giving no feedback at all. And so as a result, these inconsistent delivery flaws are what's partially driving disengagement with employees today. And so why do we say feedback is broken is because when it's not, even when it's being given due to some of these design flaws, it's not leading to the most effective experience that it needs to be for leaders to improve and grow.
Thanks, Jen. So we must change feedback to be the positive and constructive experience that it was intended to be. So I want you to reimagine feedback. First, let's imagine a focus on what your colleagues love about you, a clear understanding of you at your best. And next, let's imagine that your colleagues go further and share things for you to do to help you be even more successful, what you might try. And now imagine that your colleagues went even further to say how they'd support you through your development and reinforce those new behaviors when they see them. Now, how would it feel to receive that kind of feedback? And how would it feel as a coach to be able to share that with your clients? So let's talk about feedback at its best. We believe that feedback is at its best when you trust the intention of the person that's sharing it with you, that it's truly for your benefit and you know that. And second, that there's context to the feedback, that you understand the circumstances behind that feedback and maybe the place or the timing so that you have a clear picture of that feedback. And third, you understand what to do rather than what not to do. It's not focused on weaknesses, but is instead focused on potential solutions or futures for you. Fourth, it's done in a timely way. And then fifth, you have social support going forward to help reinforce that improvement. So for example, let's imagine that I sit down with you right after a meeting and I say, I love the way that you facilitated that meeting. You were concise, you were engaging, you made eye contact, you paused when there were questions on people's faces, and you summarized at the end. I'd love to see you do one more thing. And that is, if you were to ask people if they have any reservations, really try to dig in and try to uncover any resistance before we leave the meeting. I think that would make it even stronger. If that's something you agree with and you want to try, then next week after our next meeting, I'd be happy to watch for that. And we could do another debrief afterwards. So what would it be like to receive that sort of feedback? So today we want to talk with you about how the feedback experience can change using concepts from two key areas. First, the how. And the how is going to be focused on positive psychology. And second, the who. Because we know that feedback involves more than the single individual that's receiving it. We want to talk about how to build and create systems of support that set your people up for success, to create a social system of support. So first, positive psychology. Positive psychology is the scientific study of what's right with individuals, organizations, and communities. The study of well-being or flourishing. And this is Marty Seligman, one of the founders of the field of positive psychology. And in 1998, as the incoming president of the American Psychological Association, he challenged the profession of psychology to broaden its view and expand its fields of study. Marcus Buckingham described Marty's message, his incoming message, this way. He said, we seem to think that good is the opposite of bad. And if you want good, you should just study bad and invert it. And we're wrong, he said. If you study bad and invert it, you get not bad. So the point is this, that studying depression teaches you a lot about depression. It teaches you nothing about joy. That identifying, and this is the key concept, identifying and growing the positive is not the same as understanding or alleviating the negative. And to me, that's a light switch moment. That impacted me to understand that. To understand joy, we need to study joy. And so mental health is more than the absence of mental illness, that well-being is more than the relief of suffering, and that studying pathology, distress, and dysfunction is not the same as studying resilience and strength and growth. And I like a quote from the researchers Rice and Gable, who studied positive relationships. And they said, in practical terms, the absence of conflict and criticism in a relationship need not imply the presence of joy and fulfillment. And that's just a mind shift to start thinking about what you want rather than what you don't. Now, we may be adept at solving problems. I think I was as an HR leader. I'm sure you maybe think that as well about yourself, and I think that's a terribly important skill to have. But we can add to that skill set. And positive psychology offers a second set of possibilities. It includes the study of subjects such as resilience and strengths in relationships, grit, optimism, hope, self-efficacy, and post-traumatic growth, not just PTSD, but post-traumatic growth, and understanding mindset, emotional intelligence, and many more.
Thanks, Pete. And so building on the how and the who, and specifically the positive psychology space, we want to talk to you about how we see changing this feedback experience. And that's really this powerful combination of the positive psychology and the system support. Walking inside the positive psychology, we want to break down a few concepts for you. Taking a strengths perspective and what that really means and why that's important, using more of a solution-focused approach, and then also painting a picture for more desired outcomes or desired behaviors and why that's helpful in feedback. So first, taking a look at what we mean by a strengths perspective. As Marcus Buckingham says, strengths strengthen me. And that's because when we're operating from a place of our strengths, we're our most engaged and our most energized. So if you ever have heard the term being in flow, when you just completely lost track of time when you're working on something. Flow is that optimal balance between skill and challenge. And that's what keeps you highly engaged. That's likely a time when you're using your strengths. And so the net effect has an overall positive impact on our well-being when we are using our strengths. And of course, hearkening back to what I said a few moments ago about the power of strengths-based feedback and how that actually drives engagement for employees. And so it's critical that we start to see each other through the lens of our strengths, both understanding our own and how we can keep ourselves that are most energized, as well as those of others, and reflect that back to them. So of course, when we are talking about feedback and we talk about strengths, we're used to following that with what are someone's weaknesses or areas of improvement. And in our philosophy and our method, our approach is, what if we never asked about weaknesses? Because the simple fact is this: while weaknesses may be insightful and interesting, even informative, particularly if there's a blind spot, they're insufficient for change by themselves. Where feedback often falls short is we can paint the picture for what's wrong and where someone's falling short, but we don't go that step further to say what we want instead. What should they do? What would more effective look like? And so simply naming weaknesses and leaving it there isn't enough.
So the other reason why weaknesses aren't the most helpful is because of the negativity bias. Our negative emotions are stronger than positive, and potential threats grab our attention. So in 360s, we tune into the negative comments, yet those are not what's going to propel us forward toward success. A couple of years ago, I was listening to Marty while back on the campus at Penn, and he talked about it this way. He said, we need to teach positivity to overcome this default response that we have. Now, the fun part was how Marty described the negativity bias. He said the negativity bias is like the tongue. Your tongue swirls around the mouth, ever vigilant to find a popcorn husk stuck in your teeth. And when it does, full attention goes to that place until that popcorn is dislodged. The tongue never just cruises around the mouth saying, what beautiful teeth, how smooth. So we need to be able to move past this default response. We must overcome this negativity bias, really overcome our biology. And we can do this by taking a solution-focused approach to gathering feedback. There's a saying that the solution doesn't care why the problem occurred from the field of solution-focused coaching. Now, that's pretty thought-provoking, isn't it? So, what is a solution-focused approach? Well, a problem-solving approach would be concerned with understanding the problem. What led to it? Why did this happen? Why aren't we meeting the budget? And that feels different than how can we meet the budget? What will it take to meet the budget? How could this go better? It's a focus on what you want rather than what you don't. For example, if she could be even more effective, what would it look like? Well, how would she show up? What would you see then? You see, no problem exists all the time, and we want to understand when is the problem not a problem. And research shows that a solution-focused approach results in significantly more action steps and better outcomes than a problem-focused approach.
And so the third concept, after talking through strengths and solution-focused questions, is this idea of desired outcomes or doing more of a desired behavior. The way we like to say it is it's hard to do less of a bad behavior, so instead do more of a desired one. I also like to think of that as it's hard to break bad habits, so sometimes it's better to replace them with a new habit, a new positive habit. The age-old example of quitting smoking and starting to chew gum. It's one thing to say you're going to stop doing something, but what are you actually going to start doing in its place? And so I want to give you an example of how this shows up when it comes to feedback. And this is a little example of what we're going to walk you through in a moment of what we call our T-chart method. How do we get to naming those desired outcomes? So I was doing a 360 interview for one of my clients who I'll name Jared for today. And I was learning all sorts of great things about his strengths, how charismatic he is, how much ideation he puts forward, how he's single-handedly almost the person that helps them land most of their new business, and how impactful that is for the company. When I started to talk to people about ways he could be more effective, I started to also learn that there's maybe two sides of that coin. He also is known for talking a lot, interrupting others when he's real passionate, maybe even dominating meetings. I knew, though, if I captured the feedback just as that and relayed that back to Jared, that what happens is oftentimes when we learn about weaknesses or ways we're less effective and we don't know what to do differently, we sometimes do the opposite. And my fear was that Jared would then start to shut down, not engage in meetings, and that would have even more of a detrimental effect for the company overall. So I started to ask people the way he could do this in a more effective way. If he was communicating the way these people need him to be or showing up in meetings the way they would like him to be, what would he be doing? And that's when I started to get to this level of specificity. Suggestions came through like he would use his active listening skills. And even with that, I probed further and I said, how are you going to know? Maybe he already is listening. And they explained, well, he paces around. He's at the whiteboard. He's always interacting in the room. If he could sit down, sit back even in his chair, send a message that he's ready to take information in versus always projecting it out. Other ideas such as asking others for input, simply asking for our opinion, or coming into a brainstorm and saying, I want to facilitate the discussion today instead of being the main contributor. Or if he could seek to understand different perspectives, or even just say, I'm going to be more curious and simply be more in a question asking mode. So the reality is if Jared focused on any one of these things on the right as a new positive habit, he would automatically be doing less of what's on the left. And so it's important that we're able to get to this level of specificity, not just for Jared, but for all of those that are involved. And I'm going to explain to you why here in a moment, but let me use this next illustration to prompt you for a moment. So I want to invite you to respond in the chat. And the first question is, how many branches are on this tree? How many do you see? Go ahead and feel free to give a guess in the chat. And this one I'm not going to give you too much time on because I'm going to let you know that the answer is simply a lot. There are many branches on this tree. Now, take another look and I want to ask you, how many faces do you see? Take a moment to look a little more carefully and put a guess in if you'd like in the chat of how many faces you see. And I believe the answer is 11 or 12. But the reality is you likely didn't notice those faces right out the gate. And that's because we simply don't notice what we're not looking for. And this is actually a concept known as inattentional blindness. And so why this matters and where it comes into importance for feedback is unless the person giving that feedback, the stakeholder, takes the time to truly define and envision what success looks like, the client will simply be guessing on what to do differently. And then even if the client were to make progress, the stakeholder likely won't recognize the change when it happens because they weren't looking for it or they didn't know what they were looking for. So in the case of my client, Jared, the moment he switches gears into facilitation or asking more questions than giving more ideas, the people that gave those suggestions are going to be able to recognize that shift. And that's a key piece because we're going to talk here in a moment about the importance of system support and allyship. And we need those folks to be reflecting that progress that they're seeing in order for those new habits to stick.
So I have a story to share with you as well. And I was doing a 360 for my client who had recently been promoted. He's at a large retailer, and I was interviewing one of his peers. And honestly, they didn't have a very good relationship. And as I was interviewing this peer, and I was asking him about, what do you think my client can do to be even more effective? The response in his nice passive-aggressive Minnesota way was, I think he should work on trust. He's got another new team added to his teams, and he should work on building trust with them. And so I dug further, and I asked more questions about it. And he said, his team and my team really don't trust each other. We should work on building trust between them. And as I kept asking about that, finally he said, I don't trust the guy. And I said, that's awesome, but I don't know what you want. And it was hard. He was working at it, and he said, here's the thing, I shouldn't come into the room where he's there and his team is there and my team is there and he starts going in a different direction than where I thought we were going. He's good at getting people to follow him, and we end up going down a path that we have to backtrack from then because we're not aligned. And not showing alignment is not good. I said, that's great. I clearly know what's not working, but what is it that you want him to do instead? And it took a while. It was hard work for him to get there, but finally he said this. He said, I think he's got a pretty good intuition about when we're on the right page, when we're on the same page, and when we're not. When that intuition goes off, I want him to pick up the phone and call me or come see me so that we can get aligned before we go into the room together. I said, that I can see. And what do you think you can do? He goes, I can do the same thing. But it takes work to get to that place, to clearly see what you want rather than what you don't. So we want you to do this. On a piece of paper in front of you, we want you to create a T chart. Just make a big T. And on that left-hand side, we want you to think about somebody that you'd like to offer feedback to, or that you have feedback for, somebody that's important to you. And on that left-hand side, what is it that you would like to see that person change? What isn't working? What are the weaknesses, quote, opportunities, or what's broken? I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to start writing that down. What's not working? What's the problem that you'd like to see fixed? Even if it's one or two things, what comes to mind for that person that you're thinking about? Okay, so now on the right-hand side of that T-chart, we want you to write down what it is that you want to see instead. When they are doing it well, what does it look like? What would it look like? When is the problem not a problem? And ask yourself these sorts of questions. What would you see? What do you want them to do instead? What would that look like? How will they behave differently? Or what's a small thing that you would notice? And frankly, if you find yourself writing stop, not, don't, wouldn't, won't, or any of those other NTs, then you're not there yet. So it's clearly the behaviors that you would want to see instead, like in my example, picking up the phone and calling or coming to see me when that intuition goes off. What would it be for your person? So now we want to do a little role play between Jen and myself. She's going to help me get clear about somebody that's important in my world.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. And let me just start by asking you, what were some of the things you had there then on the left, some of the problems you'd like to see this person stop doing?
So this is a person that's in a group with me, in a small group with me. And on the left-hand side, I would say that I don't want to put too many evaluative words on it, but it seems like she can ignore what's going on in the rest of the group and kind of grab the limelight and keep talking and even have sidebar conversations when it's really somebody else's time to be speaking. So I'd like her to be quiet and stop talking. Give attention
okay.
to yeah.
Okay, so we've got a small group setting where it sounds like it's, each person takes a turn and this particular person can isn't always engaged in listening, talking maybe while others are talking kind of on the side, and maybe talking too much when it's her turn to talk even.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, so thinking about then the right side and more of that solution focused feedback, what would you like her to be doing instead?
I want to describe it as more social awareness, be aware of what's going on around her at the table.
Yeah, great. Okay, so hang with that one for a moment. What would social awareness look like? What would you see if she was being socially aware?
In my mind's eye, when she is on that left-hand side, she's just like leaning over and talking to somebody next to her. And I'd want her instead to be looking at the group and keeping with the conversation that's taking place.
Great. Okay. So you'd visibly see her engaged through the way she's looking at the group and tracking with what the others are saying. Mm-hmm. What else might you notice?
I think about a volume. So the volume would be a little bit lesser, and it would be not interrupting when somebody else is talking, but instead kind of waiting for that. Speaking up when there's a gap in the conversation.
Okay.
Maybe
all right. So I heard
picking up on what others have said.
Okay, great. So I heard a couple things in there. So she's sort of adjusting her volume accordingly to kind of when it's the appropriate time for her to share and speak. Mm-hmm. But she's also noticing when there's a natural break there or a pause, and she's waiting for that before she's jumping in and maybe talking over. Mm-hmm. So instead she's holding back. And then when she is chiming in, maybe she's showing some recognition of what she's heard from others by even adding or reflecting back what she heard.
Yeah, that was the part, the building off of the others. I think I would really notice that.
Great. Okay. Mm-hmm. So good. So how does that feel? Well, we went from stop talking and interrupting and sort of, engaging with others in sidebars to building your social awareness, which is clear and specific, but also could have a lot under it. And now what we were able to do is unpack that with some very specific behaviors and cues, both for her to practice, but also that you would notice. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does it feel imagining maybe giving her that right side feedback, some of those suggestions you just came up with?
Well, I definitely not want to give the left-hand side. I can tell you that. And the right-hand side sounds more doable. I mean, I could see myself, offering some cues and nudging her toward building off of others and staying with the others in the group. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Great. Nice job.
Thank you.
So, thank you. What we'd like to encourage you all to do is spend some more time looking on that right side and asking yourself even these same deepening questions. If you heard, I really only asked Pete two things. What would you see, or what do you want her to do instead? And what would that look like? Or what would you notice? And so it doesn't take much, but those couple questions just help you drill down to that next level of allowing you heard Pete say, see it in your own mind's eye. And that's the key to offset that inattentional blindness, to make sure that you'll notice it, but also that the person practicing knows exactly what to do. So to recap what we've covered so far then, strengths strengthen you. So making sure that you're finding an opportunity to know what your own strengths are and leverage those, but also looking for strengths in others and helping them receive that level of feedback. Using more solution-focused questions, and that's leading with a how or a what, versus a why, which tends to unpack more of the problem. Naming those desired behaviors or those desired outcomes, just as we just did here, and making sure you're naming what you want to see instead. What is it that the person is to do instead of to stop doing? What should they start doing? And finally, keep aware of that unintentional blindness and the fact that we simply don't notice what we aren't looking for. So make sure you know what it is that you want to be looking for in any feedback that you're giving to someone else. Okay, so we're going to segue then into the other half of what we refer to as this powerful combination for changing the feedback experience. And that is around the notion of system support and a couple specific concepts we want to include you in here. This idea of creating ally support or building a sense of allyship around any one person that's receiving feedback, making the feedback process much more of a two-way accountability. And finally, getting rid of confidentiality and moving much more toward an open and transparent feedback process. So first of all, when we think about allies, we say this because what we know is change simply does not happen alone. If you even take a moment to reflect through your own life right now, a big thing that you were moving through, whether it was training for a marathon, going through a divorce, starting in a new role or a new job, there's likely one or several people that were there helping you along the way. I had to laugh when I heard recently that the average date now for a New Year's resolution to kind of someone to fall off the wagon is by January 16th. But you know, the folks that get the buddy that pick them up and take them to the gym, those folks last longer when they have somebody in the process with them working on their goals. We also know this to be true from research. Marshall Goldsmith did a wonderful study in his article produced about it, Leadership is a Contact Sport, a great read. What he did is look at 8 different industries and 8 different companies, and he put a group of leaders through a year-long leadership development program. And then what he did is look at who made the most significant change over the course of that year with their goals and why. And there was one variable proven over and over that was tied back to being central for long-term change. And that was this idea of ongoing interaction and follow-up. It was the leaders that shared what they were working on, shared their goals, and engaged others in the process that showed the most significant improvement in their own changes by the end of that year. And Marshall Goldsmith coined this the follow-up factor. And so simply thinking about how can we play a part in each other's growth and development, knowing that setting each person up for a greater success.
So we know with social support, we see slopes as less steep and we feel burdens to be less heavy. This illustration reflects research done by Schnall, Harber, Stefanucci, and Profit, where they found that people who had someone standing next to them or who simply thought about a supportive person literally saw a hill in front of them to be 10 to 20% less steep than a person standing alone or a person that was thinking of somebody who was not supportive, that was a detractor. Just simply having somebody stand next to us or think about somebody that is supportive of us gets us to see slopes in front of us to be 10 to 20% less steep. So what would it be like if every day you felt like you had 10 to 20% more support or your job felt 10 to 20% lighter? What we love is how these researchers ended their piece. And they said, if social support and opportunities for emotional disclosure and differences in hope, optimism, self-worth, and self-efficacy cause people to see challenges in a more moderate way, then people who enjoy these resources will live in a subjectively less demanding and less stressful world. Conversely, those deprived of such resources will live in a world where hills are steeper, distances greater, precipices deeper, and other kinds of physical challenges more daunting and demanding. So, what if when you gave feedback, you also offered up one thing, something specific in how you can help that individual? So for the person that wanted to see Jared ask more questions and engage the group, maybe they can check in with Jared with a reminder, or even go so far as to brainstorm ways to engage the group. It takes more than just the person receiving feedback to create the change. And that's what we do in our approach to feedback. We ask each stakeholder to identify one thing, one commitment that they're willing to make to support that client going forward. We try to match that up with what their strengths are, where they feel most in flow and most confident. And by doing this, then, the client will have 6, 8, 10, or 12 allies around them, all willing to support and reinforce those new behaviors. A quick story of this and how we can find a way to support that other individual is that I was doing a 360 for an individual who's the head of schools. And I was interviewing one of the individuals on his leadership team. And she said, that when she sees him at his best, he is so energized basically by spending time with students, even though he was head of schools, whether it's teaching, being in the classroom, speaking with students at events, or even saying hello in the morning. And so the one thing that she agreed to do to put him into that place was to get with his administrative assistant and get him scheduled 2 to 3 times a week to be with students, to put him in that place where he could be his best. And his days just seemed better.
And so the last concept we want to walk you through then is this notion of confidentiality. And feedback historically is anonymous or confidential. And our belief is when we don't know how to say something constructively is when we want to say it confidentially. And we actually believe that confidentiality is a symptom of a broken system, that what we need to be doing instead to generate more effective feedback is move towards a much more open and transparent system where we can build a culture where everyone feels comfortable and understands how to give constructive feedback. And again, linking back to that T-chart exercise, primarily moving more through a solution-focused lens and painting the picture for more desired outcomes is going to allow people to feel far more comfortable and ultimately give more effective feedback to their peers and colleagues than if they were to give anonymous feedback that highlights a weakness. And further, in order to create that people system of allies that Pete just explained, in order to know who's offering what and in what ways they're willing to support you, you need to know who's saying what. And so really what we found is moving to a much more transparent system is far more effective when it comes to feedback. And so in bringing us to a close here, just to break down again the difference between more traditional feedback and what we describe as more effective feedback, in our approach, it's more focused on strengths only. We leave behind the focus on weakness. And instead, we study what drives success and we highlight what we want the person to be doing more of. We also do that through specific context and naming specific behaviors with the specific examples and the transparency of who's saying what. We do that by using solution-focused questions and then also through painting a picture for that more desired future or naming those more desired behaviors. And finally, we create a two-way accountability in the feedback process by asking each person to name one thing, one way they can actually contribute to the person's success and help them be more effective. And as a result, that creates a sense of allyship and leaves that person receiving the feedback with people all around them willing to help. And we do this through creating an open and transparent feedback process.
So whether it's in your coaching or whether it's just in your conversations, these are our encouragements for you, what you can do now. Dig into strengths, see the strengths, talk about the strengths, point those out to individuals. Think about that T-chart. Be clear about how to move from the left side, the problem side, to the solution side, the right side, on what to do, what that individual could do to be even more effective, what you'd want to see them start with. And third, gain support and offer support. Be part of that social system. Be one of those allies that is supporting the individual or garner allies for your client. And be open. Eliminate confidentiality to bring context to the feedback so that it's not confusing. As coaches and learning and development practitioners, we want you to change your perspective. The feedback is not just about the individual that's receiving it. In fact, the role is not about gathering information for our client. It's about working on their behalf to nudge the system to support them and be clear what better could be and that they'll be there to support that individual. It's about creating an environment that's conducive to deeper, lasting change, which occurs faster with more dialogue, disclosure, and depth. That all are stakeholders in each other's success. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be staying on to answer any questions. So please feel free to send them through the chat.